Hello and welcome to SLP Full Disclosure. I am your host, Jennifer Martin, and today joining me is one of my favorite people, Michelle O'Laughlin. And this is kind of a special episode because we're actually live for the first time in over 2 years. And this episode is also very timely because our guest knows a lot about a lot. But one of the things that she really knows a lot about is that transition from graduate school into the real world, because she has worked in a university for a long time. So before we jump into this, I'm going to tell you about Michelle. And I actually have to read this bio. This is how experienced she is. I can't memorize this. So Michelle O'Laughlin is a speech language pathologist with a plethora of professional experience. She has worked in public schools, therapeutic day schools, therapy barns, providing hippotherapy, early intervention, pediatric clinics, private practice, teletherapy, and in a university setting. Michelle has worked primarily as a pediatric therapist, however, has worked with adults as well for fluency and voice disorders, including transgender voice modification. Michelle and her husband recently relocated from Chicago to the Denver area, where she has returned to providing teletherapy speech services to elementary and middle school students. But prior to her move west, Michelle served as a clinical assistant professor for the SLP graduate program at Northern Illinois University. There, she taught and mentored countless graduate SLP students through their clinical work at the university. And Michelle has always communicated to her students the necessity of living life in balance, facilitating mindfulness workshops for her graduate students to help them manage the many stressors of graduate school. So with that, welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So great to be here.
Oh my gosh, this is such a big moment because, again, we haven't been live in over 2 years. And again, just being one of my favorite people.
Thank you.
And I'm like so excited to talk with you. And we were just saying, even though I feel like we talk a lot, there's a lot of this that I've never really picked your brain about.
Right.
So I'm excited to learn with
Pick
you.
away.
Yes, I will. So one of the things, just I always like to know, and this I was thinking too, I don't even know this whole story about you, but tell us about your professional journey and what led you through the university and to where you are now.
Wow. So as you read in my bio, I have so much varied experience. I've always been interested in different settings. So every few years or so, always been in the field of speech pathology, but always curious about different aspects of it in different settings and different populations. So at the time that right before I started working for the university, I was working in a pediatric clinic, contracting with them to elementary schools, as well as doing early intervention, and teaching yoga at that same time. So I had a little bit going on, went to a workshop at Northern Illinois University and ran into a former colleague of mine who said, I have just been talking about you. We're really needing a supervisor who is comfortable with supervising students for fluency disorders, because they did not have a professor at the time or a clinical faculty that was comfortable supervising students for that particular disorder. I said, well, sure, I can probably fit that into my other 4 jobs. So started at the university for about 5 hours a week extra, and was just loving that interaction working with the grad students. That was just a very different sort of evolution of my career, and loved it. And I did specialize in fluency, but I eventually started taking on supervising them when they were with other clients as well for articulation, phonology, all of the things, language. So 5 hours over the period of a couple months turned into about 20, and then eventually got to 30. And at some point, the chair of our department said, would you consider sort of not doing those other things you're doing and just coming to, interview for the job of clinical assistant professor at the university for a full-time faculty job? So I did that. And I loved it. So I was full-time at the university, supervising graduate students in all aspects of their journey. And that's how I ended up at the university. So it was really a great evolution of my career, sort of being that bridge between their academic content and, boots on the ground working with clients. So, yeah.
Well, and this is why I love this question, because it's like, I feel like it's so interesting where it's just a good reminder. You don't have to have everything planned out.
Exactly.
And it's like, working at a university ever, I mean, on your radar? You were doing the 20 other things, but was
Right.
that ever even on your radar?
It wasn't. And yet when I got into that role, I realized how much I loved it and how I had been doing my job as a clinician, as a working clinician for over 20 years. But supervising and teaching new clinicians was such an exciting turn for me because it really taught me a lot about what I already knew, taught me a lot about what was being taught in the current graduate programs, and gave me a chance to help new clinicians find their voice and their confidence.
Yes, and we'll definitely dive more into that, because I know that's a very important piece of your work there.
Right.
And another thing too that I'm thinking is that I feel like so many times we think, and you could have easily said, "Well, I don't know. I don't really know how to work at a university. I've never done a university." So it would have been really easy to say, "No, I don't feel like I have those skills."
Right.
Did you feel prepared to go into that, or did you look up anything or talk to people to prepare yourself, or did you just dive in?
Yeah, that is a great question. Over the years as a working clinician, I did supervise SLP students on their external placements over the years, as well as having supervised clinical fellows during their 9-month clinical fellowship year. So I had some experience with that, but I would say that dipping my toe into it with those first 5-10 hours really did help to build my confidence in it, because I realized that I had so much to share, and I really did know a lot of what they were going through and how to relay that information. When I had more hours, though, when I developed or worked into that full-time job, I did feel a little bit out of my element, honestly. So, like anything else, I started to do research. I really requested that some of my colleagues that had more experience mentor me. Big fan of the mentor. And I observed how they would do that, how they would interact with students. I also took workshops about supervising. I read books about communication in supervising. So I did some research, but all the research in the world can't replace just actually being with students. So I really kind of learned as I went, and I realized that I loved it and I was pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like it's so common now, and I'm sure it's in other fields, but especially in ours, you hear all the time this imposter syndrome. And I'm sure there was a little bit of that, but it's also, I think it's just such a good reminder for anybody listening that it's okay. You don't have to be perfect to start, because you did some of the work on your own, but also learning as you went was probably the best combination you could have had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is what I would always tell the graduate students. I had a foundation that I could build on, and I asked questions, and I developed relationships. And this was what, and I figured out what was it going to take for me to be successful in this new role. And that's what I would always tell my graduate students as well. It's like, you're graduating with, I think I'm getting ahead of myself here with your questions, but you're graduating with a foundation.
Yeah.
And you have to, build from there. But at least once you graduate, or once you have that foundation, you know what you don't know, and you know what it's okay that you don't know, and you find your people that can help you through that.
Yeah. And I always think, you see those must have this experience to have this job. And I'm like, but then how do you get that experience?
Right.
So you saying yes is a good reminder.
It was a leap. Don't get me wrong. It was a leap, but it was an exciting leap. And I was ready for it.
Yeah. It was time. So I'm curious, just because I know when I think back to when I went to grad school, back in the dark ages, that it was competitive for sure. But I don't remember feeling this like crippling anxiety and stress. I felt confident, well, I'll get in somewhere. So it may not be my first choice, but whatever. I feel like the landscape has changed. So what have you seen, like what was the landscape like when you first started, working in the university?
Yeah, I think I'm with you in that 100 years ago when I was applying to graduate school, I just figured it would just all work out and I'll get in somewhere and it'll be
Yeah.
great. And now I feel that the graduate students are extremely stressed. It's every program accredited. I was in Illinois at the time, but which was saturated with accredited speech language pathology programs, but they were all very competitive. So every grad student application that passed my desk, they were all straight A students. It wasn't just enough to be top of the class, A student. So I feel like the students coming in felt a lot of pressure to be the best. They were very competitive, and we tried to foster. Well, I mean, we definitely fostered an environment that was not competitive. Once they got there, we would say, "You're here. You made it. Now look around. This is your family. These are the people that are going to work with you, not against you, help you, not hinder you. The people that you can rely on and to use to build each other up and borrow from and learn from." So I feel like we tried to change that perception as soon as they got into our program. And we also tried to convey that during some of the orientations when we would have open houses for students that had been admitted, but had not yet made a decision.
Yeah.
So we knew they were going through other programs during that same type of sort of orientation. And we hoped that we stood out by saying that we cultivate an environment of inclusivity and support. So yes, do I think the landscape changed? Absolutely. I feel like they all came to us very high-strung, very type A. I'm reluctant to use that, but it's true.
Yeah.
Perfectionist, and we tried to kind of soften that a little bit once they were in our program.
Yeah, because I'm thinking as you're saying that, you come out already, and I do remember a little bit of that where it would, everybody was applying at the same time, and there was that feeling of, you'd hear somebody, "Oh, I got into these three," and I'm thinking, "Oh, I haven't heard anything," and it does start to feel like, and again, I think, like you, I was like, "Man, it'll work out. Something will happen."
Right.
But I think if you come out charged like that, like, "Okay, I made it," it is probably really hard to dial that back. But I love that was a
Right.
priority at your program.
Well, I think part of the reason that it was so competitive is that our cohort was only 25 people max per year. We would start in the summer and then go straight through till the end of the spring for in 2 years. So other cohorts might have been larger than that, but if you go from a pool of 250 to 300 straight A applicants, and you're narrowing it down to 25 individuals for a cohort, that's competitive. Which is why I know our professors always recommended to our undergrad students going to graduate school apply to at least 9-10 schools.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the recommended.
I don't know what I would have done.
I know.
I could barely. I remember the place I ended up going. I was like, ugh. I remember my mom saying, "Well, what about this one?" I'm like, "I'm done. I don't want to apply." She's like, "Well, maybe you should just do this one more." Well, that's where I ended up going.
Yeah.
But it was like, I was not at the 9-10 level.
Right. Well,
yeah.
and now there's a system in place, obviously, where students can send all of their information at once to a whole bunch of different schools. Some of the schools will have different specific requirements, perhaps like a video, state your intention sort of thing, or maybe an in-person interview.
Yes.
But a lot of the requirements are similar across the board for universities, so they're able to make applications without having to send in paperwork again and again and again.
Look at these kids today, Michelle. They
I
just just suffer through like
back in the day. I know.
And so you touched on, it is probably when everybody has straight A's. I know, looking at even Ivy League universities, I know like Harvard's changing what they prioritize.
Right.
So when everybody has the same grades and, the high GREs, what did you prioritize instead?
Yeah, great question. So I was also on the graduate admissions committee. So we would get assigned a random block of, so mind you that the 250 or 300 had already been vetted through the graduate school. So we only saw the top of the top, right? They all had straight A's. So it was the GPA at that point wasn't really an issue for us.
Okay.
And we had a rubric that we would go through. So I'd be assigned my 60 kids that I would have to go through and complete this rubric. And then we would meet and talk about things. So we, of course, beyond the grades, we would look at things like leadership and involvement and research interests and this type of thing. But honestly, and letters of recommendation, of course. So what I really put a lot of weight into, though, as a member of this committee, was the letter of intention. I was really looking for knowledge and insight into the applicant. I wanted to know what inspired this person, what qualities in themselves did they feel would make them successful as a speech language pathologist? What motivated them? What sparked them? What really makes them excited about the field and to give to the field? They did not have to know, I want to work in a school or I'm going to go to a hospital. I would prefer that they didn't know that. What I wanted was, somebody who described themselves as passionate and motivated and organized and open to trying what our program had to offer, right? So I looked at that. Also, letters of recommendation are funny because you read enough of them from professors and you can really read through between the lines, right? So we would know if a professor didn't really know the student very well. You sort of get these comments like, yeah, they showed up and they asked good questions, as opposed to, somebody who really was invested in the student, or the student really did extra in that class, or led something within the class, or was part of that professor's research, going on. So there were things that kind of gave us more knowledge about the person. And that's what I was looking for, because straight A's doesn't necessarily translate to good clinical skills.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So I would have kids from the top schools, who had these, who study. It's a small professional community, right?
Yeah.
Especially in academia, who would study with these big name research, professors that we would know. And, kudos to them. We love them. But they had all this academic intelligence that didn't necessarily translate to sitting on the floor with a 4-year-old, truly, or interacting with caregivers.
Yes.
So, if I looked at somebody whose GPA was a little bit less than the top, I was also looking at who that person was, and I could get a lot more information from just the GPA.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm curious as you're saying this, that I keep saying I'm curious because I'm like, my next question, the follow-up, is that I think I would really struggle with the whole, having it be the top GPA, because I feel like then you are missing these gems because I know that there's been different times in my life where my study skills were not great, but man, did I turn out to be a pretty good clinician, And so I feel like, is there ever a thought, do you think, where that's just going to be taken off the table? Or do you feel like they have to have something like the GPA? Because I'm thinking there's people that they're just not good at memorizing. They have test anxiety. They didn't have the resources to take all the, the tutoring or the this and that. Was there ever a thought of, can we not prioritize the GPA, or is that?
So the GPA was always above, let's just call it 3.6. Let's just call it that. Okay. So there could be somebody with 3.6 as opposed to somebody with the 4.0, 4.0, right? Who also didn't have maybe a certain involvement, but maybe they had really great letters of recommendation. And I thought their intention letter was phenomenal. And so we would get together and bring the human element into our rubric session, right? So we would sometimes, I don't want to say fight for somebody, but advocate for an individual. Also, my scores were not super, super high. My GPA was good, but what I've been told, what I had been told many times by the graduate admissions committee, is that the grade point average does not correlate to the clinical skills as much, or the ability to be successful in a graduate program, as does the GRE score. So the GRE score was also part of it, and people would actually argue against somebody that really didn't do well, because that could be, everything else could be high, and the GRE score could be questionable. And so we'd have to say, is that, and then I would bring up the testing anxiety and things like that. So occasionally we would let somebody in who did not, who in our minds was sort of not a trial, but sort of like, we're going to keep an eye on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, yeah, it'd be interesting to know. I don't think I would have probably made it in your program. I'm like, yeah,
I felt that way actually as a faculty member.
You're like looking at the rubric thinking, woo,
Right.
I wouldn't have made the cut.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward to they have their, put in their time. They're going to graduate. What steps were put into place to help prepare them for that? You know, you've been in school your whole life up until that point.
Right.
And so how did you all prepare them for the real world?
Yeah, I think our program was really special in that regard. I'm sure other programs have this in place as well, but we did provide part-time medical and school placements for students, which would have just been during so during semesters where they were taking courses, we would get them maybe 1 or 2 days in a facility of some sort where they would be working with obviously a licensed professional. However, the last semester of their graduate program, they would be on their externals, right? So they would spend that entire last semester doing 8 weeks in a medical placement and 8 weeks at a school placement. So they were being prepared, I think, more than other programs just because of some of these part-time exposures that we had them do. And if things came up in our local community with like, oh, we need to, screen the preschoolers or something, we would just grab, that would be an opportunity for preschool or for our clinicians to get out and do some work under supervision of our faculty, of course. So I was also the placement coordinator for medical placements as well. So that was something that I worked all year on, was both their part-time and their full-time placements. So medical in that setting, in this particular instance, was anything that was not a public school. So it would be a alternative school, pediatric clinic, inpatient, outpatient, acute care, skilled nursing facility, that type of thing. So that was considered a medical placement.
Okay.
And then public school was public school, and that was required, right? So they would automatically do that, but the medical side was a little bit more variable for them. The semester before, actually the year before, a couple semesters prior to their externships, we would give them sort of an application form and say, tell me particularly, because they all had to do school, but I would say, tell me in particular if there's something you don't want to do. And just be honest, right? If somebody said, I can't stand any bodily fluid. I don't want to see mucus. I don't want to see blood. Don't ever put me in an actual hospital. I would say, great, no hospital for you. And I would find them in, maybe an outpatient or an alternative school, that type of thing. Some people were extremely focused on what they wanted exposure and experience in during their last semester. So, we get a sense of what they were looking for. Conversely, I had a colleague that was responsible for the school placement. So she would say, are you looking for the littles? You want the, elementary school? Do you want preschool? Do you want high school? And, they have feelings preferences at that point. And we're looking to match preferences, skill set, personality, all of that. So we tried to give them the experience to the best of our ability in the real world that they would be successful in, right before they graduate.
Did you ever feel like those people that were, because I felt like, oh, I'm going to work I want adults, I want medical, that's what I'm doing. And then I ended up spending most of my career working with babies coming out of the NICU. Yeah. And I never would have ever dreamt that was going to be the path. Is that part of the conversation with them, is that I know that this is what you think you want to do. However, our job is to help you be well-rounded. Our job is to help you so that if you want to change gears, you can. Right.
So you would have been a nightmare for me because I would have had to sit down with you repeatedly and say, you need to be open to new experiences,
remember,
Jennifer.
I wouldn't have made it into your program, so you wouldn't have had to worry about me.
From the beginning, we say, because I'd have students come into my office in the first 2 weeks of the program saying, I'm a basket case. I don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I would say, okay, let's take a beat. Let's breathe.
First step, breath.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We always said that we graduated generalists and not specialists, and that was our goal, right? We did not want you coming out knowing
Yes.
exactly what you wanted to do for the rest of your life necessarily. Because all of us as professionals, as seasoned, experienced professionals had worked in a variety of settings and had bounced from one sort of population to another. So we had that conversation quite a bit. It's okay that you don't know. And my advice to them always was take all of the experiences in, and if it's something you really don't like, then you really don't like it. And that's just as valuable.
Yes.
Just as valuable as something that completely turns you on and makes you want to go in that direction forever and ever.
Yes.
So I would have conversations with students who I would find a placement for them, and they would come to me not happy. And I would say, look, we think this is going to be a good match. And this is something you can always learn from every supervisor.
Yes.
You can learn something from every experience. And there were only so many medical placements in acute care or, inpatient, that type of a thing. Not all of these facilities were that excited about taking a student. So, and it was a very competitive area. In the Chicagoland area, there were a lot of programs that were graduating, speech language pathology students, and they all needed placements as well.
Yeah.
So, it was very competitive. And I tried to do my best to match the supervisor with the student as well, somebody that could be successful in an outpatient rehab or be successful in inpatient.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because I actually did not get a job one time because I thought, well, I've got all these specialized skills. Of course, they wanted a generalist. And I remember when she said, oh, well, we were looking more for, I was like, well, I could have been that. I would have been whatever you wanted me to be. I didn't know that. So it was, so that is just a good reminder that you don't have to be a specialist. Sometimes people want a generalist. So
you have to be coachable and approachable. I took this from baseball when my son was in baseball, but it is so, so true. You have to be open and willing and asking questions and, willing to take direction and willing to also assert your independence. It's just a whole combination of, being in an environment, sponging it up. But yes, we used to tell them also that even during your first, your CFY, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be doing that for the rest of your life as well.
Yes. What you do that first year is not what you're going to retire.
Exactly.
I'm like, nowhere. So.
Well, exactly. And that's why, I think my experience was appealing when I would talk about things that I did. I would tell my students sort of the trajectory of my career and say, I got interested in, I started working in early intervention. I hadn't done that the first 15 years I was working. And then I was working at a therapy barn and got certified in hippotherapy, which is utilizing the horse as a therapeutic tool, which I didn't know existed prior to that. So that was a wonderful, shift in the course of my career. So you don't know the opportunities that will come up or the people that you'll meet that will expose you to things that you may end up loving.
Absolutely. Yes. I love that. That's such a good reminder.
Yeah.
So now whenever, I'm sure you kept in touch and knew kind of what was happening once they left the program, went on to do their clinical fellowship. Was there patterns of kind of the most challenging pieces of that transition that you would later hear about, just kind of across the board from students?
I'm not sure. I feel like we prepared them with the solid foundation, as well as giving them that safety net of we are still here for you during this CFY, even though you will go on to have different supervisors and bosses. You can still reach out to us with questions. They were like our kids every single year that they would graduate. So we were invested in their success. I still will get emails about writing letters of recommendation. So we're still connected in that way. Or I'll, take a phone call about somebody who's used me as a reference for a job. So I think that the foundation hopefully was enough to launch them because the foundation not only included everything that they studied, but the understanding that they could find their community and develop that community of people that will help them to be successful. Recognize what they need and ask for it. So being an advocate for themselves, finding a place that isn't just, I'm going to get this 9-month CFY over with, but find a place, take your time, find a place where you want to be part of that community, where you want to be invested in that group,
I think that's a great advice. And I wish that I had that advice going, because I think the hardest transition was that no one had ever taught me about advocating for myself.
No.
And I had gone from having almost this very protective bubble of my cohort, because we were very close, and a lot of great supervisors.
Right.
And then went out in the real world and, got my adult medical that I thought I, wanted so much. And I was not prepared for just the lack of supervision and how much it was going to be, you're on your own. And there was some times where I was in positions and I'm thinking, it's probably a good thing I did not hurt somebody, because I just didn't have any supervision. And so I wish, and I never thought to, advocate for myself. I just thought, well, I can't, that's a sign of weakness if I'm asking for help. And so I think that's great that it's like, no, that's not, that's a sign of
maturity.
Professional maturity. Yes. Is that, hey, I need help. This is not, I'm not doing this well and I need some support.
Right. So part of the preparation was telling them when you are interviewing, you are interviewing them as well as they are interviewing you for the good fit all the way around, right? But ask, where's my support coming from? No matter where, who can I reach out to? Who's going to, get me through the onboarding process? Because that's just such a vital year.
Yeah. And I think too, this is a good reminder for those that get into the coveted medical positions, because there are so few that I think sometimes, and I know I felt this way, like, I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm going to never, so I think there was this feeling of, oh, I'm just so grateful that I got this. I don't ever want to, but that still doesn't mean that you can't advocate for yourself and ask those questions, because again, that looks really good on your behalf that you are thinking about these things. That's looks good to the person who's interviewing you.
Well, right. Right. During an interview, you should never overinflate a skill or say that you have one that you really don't.
Yes.
And be really honest about not highlighting, of course, what you don't have experience in, but highlighting what you have experience in and what you'd like to learn more about.
Yeah.
So that kind of gets to the part where maybe I don't have a lot of experience with, with swallowing, but boy, I would really like to work with somebody who could mentor me in that area.
Yeah.
Or take continuing education, that type of thing. So, because employers know across the board, they should know that you can't do everything. You are just getting out of your program. You're a baby. Yeah. So they realize that you don't have the level of experience that somebody who's been out for a few years does, and that you will need training and you will need coaching. So, it's just the right amount of confidence and curiosity.
Yes.
Curiosity.
Be curious. And so what would you say if, what was the best kind of consistent advice that you would say to them as they were finishing up? That was kind of, what was your signature advice to your cohort as they were leaving?
Yeah. Well, I told them this the day one and throughout, but everything is an interview. Every interaction with anybody at your facility is an interview. Be professional. Be professional. Be open. Communicate. Make sure that you have the support that you need by asking for it.
Yeah.
Make sure that you have the direction. Find your people that will help you out. Again, we get back to that mentorship. And I would say be patient, because most of them graduate feeling like they needed a job yesterday.
Yes. There's
and
a lot of like,
nobody
now.
ever listened to me when I said that, but I would say, you know what? Again, going back to take your time and find the right fit for you. Don't just take the first one that is offered, because frankly, you're going to get a lot of offers.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the wonderful nature of our profession.
Yeah.
Whenever I've wanted a job, I've had one. Because you know what I mean? I mean, they're out there for speech pathologists.
There's no unemployment. No. I mean, it's like less than 1%.
Right. So be selective. be selective, take your time,
Yeah.
figure it out, don't, and it was a mistake that I made as well. Nobody listens.
Of course, because at that time that's why, hindsight is 2020.
Right,
So,
right.
and I think too is just some thing that I think was so, and it sounds like you started the program helping them see, hey, you're in the trenches together for this 2 years. And I don't know what I would have done without the support of my colleague or my cohort coming out of school, because it was like, having that support system.
Right.
So I think too, just a reminder for anyone is stay in touch with those people.
Absolutely.
To this day, they are my support system.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends from grad school just sent me a message the other day and said, "Hey, what do you recommend for? Do you know any great CEUs for speech sound disorders?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, this is the." So we still
Absolutely
to this day support each other.
And stay in contact with not only your cohort, but your faculty.
Yes.
The ones you had the good relationships
Yes.
with, and any place that you did shadowing, or you did maybe a part-time placement with, and then of course your full-time, if that was somebody in a setting that you were interested in, get business cards.
Yeah.
Write thank you notes.
Do they still have those?
Oh yeah. Get business cards, get contact information.
QR codes.
Yes. Yes. And keep in touch with those people, because students they will get jobs because of people that were impressed with them.
Yeah.
That they worked with as a student.
Well, and that is such a great reminder, because you and I both know this is a small professional community.
Right.
And I want to be nice to everybody.
Yes, absolutely.
You may show up to a new job and that person that you're like, is your boss.
100%. Yes.
So,
talking to them about, it was actually on a slideshow that we had of, don't use social media. Don't friend people. Don't keep that really, really separate, and just be cognizant. Yes, just be cognizant of, yourself as a professional, because people can look you up, and they want somebody who is professional representing their company. You are the face of that company. I mean, when you're our student, you're the face of NIU, but when you're their employee, that's, you're the face of their company.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very good reminder. And luckily we didn't have to worry about that. So check that box.
Right.
So what, if you looking back at you leaving into the workforce, now having years of experience to look back on, what would be the piece of advice you would give yourself as you're entering the workforce out of graduate school?
This was the one question that stumped me, actually. I had to really think about this. And I think it's what I said a little bit ago of be patient. And if you really are interested, stay the course, right? I completed my CF, my clinical fellowship year. I really wanted to get in. Now, mind you, I've had a wonderful career and I regret nothing. However, I initially started with the intention of going into TBI. I was very much focused on that after grad school. I thought, this is what I want to do. And another CF and I got positions at a facility in Chicago. I couldn't have been more excited about it. And in 2 weeks, they had budget cuts and cut both of us, and decided they could not take CFs.
Oh no.
And I panicked. I was recently married. Of course I graduated a minute ago, so I had to have a job. And I got into a contract company. It gave me a little bit of experience with everything. But I ended up getting more of my pediatric direction from that initial contract job. So I would say, take your time, take a beat, think about what you want to do, and then find a way to get that exposure. And it may not be, if it is in a medical facility, it might not be that they're going to hire you right out of the gate as a new grad, or even just completing your CF, your clinical fellowship year. But who can you shadow? Who can you do PRN with? Who can you be the one that takes over for the vacations and maternity leave, so that you can establish yourself as a reliable, part of a team, and then work from there. But don't panic. Take your time, find the good fit.
Yeah. And I think it doesn't feel like at the time, I'm sure that was devastating
It
at the
was.
time. That was like, that was your dream.
It was.
You were 2 weeks
Yeah.
in. You probably had no idea budget cuts were even a thing.
No.
And then, but then it led you somewhere else.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
that's really has opened so many doors after that.
Absolutely.
That-
No regrets at all.
Yeah.
No, and so that's a lesson as well, just in life in general,
Yeah.
that if something happens that you did not anticipate happening, or, you lose something,
Yeah.
that you may not have really lost anything.
Yeah.
You may have just gained a new opportunity.
Well, and it's just maybe steering you in a direct, make like water.
Right.
So I say, just go with the flow. If
Yeah.
it's like, you got a rock there, water
That's
moves
right,
around
that's
it.
right.
It doesn't stop.
The other thing you asked about before, I think I just remembered about advising students as they leave is to create the balance in their life. This was something that was still is very important, but creating boundaries,
Yeah.
or part of advocating for yourself is establishing boundaries, right? And being able to have your professional life and then have your personal life, and finding the things that really make you happy that are outside of work, to maintain that sort of balance in your life, and that will, in the long run, prevent the burnout that we inevitably will experience in a helping profession.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you about that as well, is that, they're coming into grad school already just, worn out. And so then
Right.
by the time that's over, they're even more worn out. And then it's time to get a job. And
Right.
I've seen and I've had so many people just personally that I know, and new grads that are starting and they're like exhausted, and they don't even feel like, it just doesn't even feel like they're a passion anymore.
Right.
So you touched on some of it, is just, I think boundaries is huge. Gosh, if I could, I wish I would have learned that earlier. That came late, and I wish that.
What time is it? That came really late.
It came really late. But I think, boundaries, and like you said, that balance. And what other thoughts do you have for if you were talking to a new grad that's saying like, I'm entering the workforce and I don't even know why I went into this anymore. I'm so tired. What would you say to them?
Well, I think finding the right job is first and foremost. If they're coming out and if you enjoy what you do, you will be energized from that. So that's really important. And if you find a community, you will be energized by that. And then don't forget the things that you love that were not speech related, because we live and breathe and sleep speech language pathology in graduate school.
Yes.
It's beyond our full-time job. And I tried to, within the program, counsel them, mentor them on taking this time off. Don't look at your book. Pick a day where you're not studying and you're not reading and you're not listening to the lecture again. And, finding those things. And it comes down to mindfulness.
Yeah.
So mindfulness is, of course, not about turning off your brain, but about having complete focus in the moment of something. So I would say when you are in school, you are 100% in school listening. You are taking notes. You are analyzing. You are putting things together. When you're at home and you are playing with your dog, play with your dog. If you go to a yoga class, be in yoga class. If you're with somebody at dinner, a friend of yours, catching up, just be there. So being able to separate, it's not just the boundaries, but it's about giving yourself that time to be in the moment present.
Yeah.
Will make you feel like you have more time, because if you're constantly worrying about school on your day off, then you're exhausted from constantly worrying about school.
Yeah. No, those are such great reminders. And I think one thing I see too is and I remember feeling this way too, where I would leave the school and I'm thinking, well, half the people are still here. So I guess, should I stay and keep working too, even though my day is done? Don't fall into that trap, because then what it does is it creates that culture where everybody feels like they have to burn themselves out. So it's like, work hard, play hard.
Absolutely.
Do your job, but then turn it off.
Right.
Because this is what I also say to new grads too, is that if you don't take care of yourself, you can't be good for anybody else.
No.
And then all the reasons you wanted to go into this profession and all the gifts that you have that were going to contribute, they're not there.
Right.
So like, it's okay and it's not selfish, and it's
Right.
in everybody's best interest to just, like you said, turn that off and then don't think about it until you go
Absolutely.
back.
I always would tell students when
Yeah.
they were planning their day, if they worked in a school, anytime actually, schedule your lunch.
Yes.
Because nobody there cares if you eat lunch.
Yes. It's
So
true.
whatever time you've got,
Yeah.
schedule it. Instant writing has to happen then. It's in the planner.
Yeah.
The other thing is in graduate school, I would tell them to be really aware of, again, going back to mindfulness, when do you study best? Maybe, I mean, if I'm an early morning person, so
Yeah.
I'd rather get up at 5 and put my hours in to do things. If everyone's around in the workroom and my cohort is sitting there cramming for something at 7:30 in the evening, I'm out. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do that because I don't have any brain power left. Know yourself. When does your body and your mind feel receptive to taking in all of the information for graduate school?
Yeah.
So be aware of that. And in terms of not comparing yourself to others, some people are 10 p.m. studiers.
Yeah.
It's what they do. Some of us get up at 5. So be aware of, of what you need throughout the day. Maybe you need a break just to sit and eat. Maybe you need a walk around the building. But, being mindful of what's happening in your body and when you have the most energy to do your job as a graduate student and your job when you get out of school
Yeah.
is the most important thing.
Yeah. And I think also that you'll never be caught up. So
Right.
don't feel like taking work home every weekend is
No.
going to be the secret. All you're going to do is fry yourself.
Exactly.
And I love that. Schedule your lunch break, but treat it. You wouldn't schedule an eval with a patient or a student and then say, well, I'm not going to show up. You'd show up.
Right.
So you've got to do the same for those breaks for yourself. You have to look at
Exactly.
yourself and say, I have to show up for me
Exactly.
because then I can't show up for them.
Right.
So
Yes.
yeah. Okay. This has been, again, we could talk.
Hours.
I know. I was going to say.
And we have.
I don't know if anyone wants to listen to us for hours, but okay. So the final thing, we're starting something new.
Okay.
Okay. So we have some lightning round questions.
Okay.
That you were not aware of before. And so, but they're just some speech related, some not, but this is what we're going to end on. So, okay. The first is a would you rather.
Okay.
Okay. So would you rather be forced to sing along or dance to every song you heard?
Dance.
Okay. Really? So even if you're in the grocery store, in the elevator.
Shake it, baby.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I would choose sing, but nobody around me would choose that for me. Like,
I didn't say I was good at the dancing, but I don't think it matters.
it doesn't matter. What is it? Dance like no one's watching.
That's right.
Right? So,
Even
okay.
at the grocery store.
Okay. If you could only work on one area related to speech or language for the rest of your career, what would it be?
You mean like a
Like
disorder?
one specific, like articulation,
Okay.
language comprehension.
Yeah.
But what if you could choose one thing that you could only do
Ever and ever.
till you retire?
Yeah. Fluency.
Okay.
Yeah. That's always been my specialty, my interest, my passion. Fluency, individuals of all ages. I've worked with 2.5-year-olds and I've worked with 70-year-olds.
But that's good because we need more people that are good at fluency. So I support your choice.
Thank you.
Because you asked. But okay, so what is this one? May be hard, and I bet this is one of these that you're going to think of later and be like, oh, what I should have said, but maybe not.
Okay.
Okay, the best meal or food you have ever eaten, and it could be like mom's meatloaf. I mean, what like it could
Yeah. So I'm not a big foodie.
Okay.
So I'm not one of these people. Yeah. So just that being said,
Okay.
but through the generation of my family, we have a spaghetti and meatball recipe that I've sort of evolved and morphed into my own. And I would say that it's always been comfort food from my mother. When my mother made it, when my grandmother made it. Is on the Italian side.
Oh, nice.
So I love to make it for my family, my children, my husband, and the smell of it is just always extremely comforting. And I would say that's my favorite.
Oh, that's a good choice.
Yeah.
Now, do you have it written down or is it like in your brain?
So my mother, who never writes down any recipe ever, and I had to really pin her down, sort of made me an outline, a general outline, and I've kind of filled it in over the years. So I kept the outline, and so a lot of it's still in my head, which perhaps isn't extremely helpful to my children, but I will write it down.
Yes, you've got to. We have one. I do not come from a long line of good cooks, and other people in my family will say the same thing. But the one, my grandmother, she was so good, but she didn't write anything down, and so we've all been like clamoring to figure out. And it's like it just went with her.
Right.
We'll never know. So yeah, you got to write it down.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. So, what was your most challenging class in grad school?
Oh,
if you had to pick one.
Yes. I would say cranial facial anomalies.
Okay.
Yes. It was a professor that I absolutely adored. He was the chair at the time. But it was the only class I could never get beyond. I couldn't get better than a B on anything. I was such a solid high B, but I just could never figure out his exact wording. But it was, but I thought it was fascinating. We did a lot of interesting field trips for cleft palate team and that sort of a thing. It was very interesting. Did not become my specialty. But fascinating, and I'm just impressed by people that that work with that. But I would say that was my hardest. And you?
Oh gosh, that's a long list. Actually, you know what was one, because the professor was so hard and just I don't know if she's still retired, if she's still in the university, she probably wouldn't remember me, but voice was so hard. Actually, and even audiology.
Oh well, you don't have to go there. Audiology, yes, of course, but oral rehab, that was really hard.
Yeah, that was the one professor that really like scolded me because I did not show up prepared.
Well, because people think that it's audiology, speech pathology, but we are cut from very different cloths.
Yes,
very different cloths. And so, you get a speech pathology student in the audiology class, and you just feel like a bit of a fish out of water.
Yeah. Oh, and you have to do those hours, and I was like, I don't really care about this. So yeah, but voice was really
okay
because she was hard, and I think I went into like knowing everyone was like, oh, this class. So I think I had that in my head.
Yes.
That it was going to be so hard. So maybe that contributed.
And if I had a better, I did not enjoy my voice class as well. And it was something that I became obsessed with the older I got, the farther along in my career I got, because so I had to do a lot of research and workshops and CEUs on my own for voice to sort of teach myself. But I ended up loving working with voice, loving it, and did quite a bit of it with both children and adults.
There you go.
Yes, and that wasn't something that I left graduate school with a really good handle on.
Yeah, that one's a hard one to be with a good handle on.
But there were quite a few crossover strategies and philosophies with fluency.
Oh yeah, interesting. No, that does make sense. Yeah, with the breath and
big big fan of the breathing.
That does make sense. I mean, it's all connected.
It all is.
So
easy onset.
Okay, last question. And this is kind of speech path related. If you had to pick one species of animal that could speak, which would you pick?
Absolutely my cats.
I knew you were going to say
yes. Predictable, I guess.
What if you think they're going to say nice things? You think it's going to be a positive conversation?
They're a little edgy, but so am I. So I feel like that could be a good relationship either way.
You could go toe to toe with them?
Totally. Hold my own with a cat.
I'm just like, I know she's going to say her cats. I know it. But I was just thinking, because I just went to the zoo, the Cheyenne Mountain this weekend.
Did?
Yes.
Oh, love it.
Yes, if you're in the Colorado area, it's the best zoo in the world.
Yeah.
I
went on your recommendation. And I have the most. There's a picture of me, 18 pictures of me feeding giraffes that are it's just my favorite thing in the whole world.
Yes, that is the speech path animal right there with the 18-inch long tongue. And I was like face to face, like with their whiskers rubbing. It was heaven. But after that experience, I would almost think like I was fascinated watching the elephants. And I was just thinking, I wonder what they're thinking. I feel like they'd have so many like really thoughtful, wise things
Yes,
to
their
say.
processing is
Yes.
fascinating.
Yes. So I think I'd say an elephant.
Interesting.
But maybe my dog, but I'd be afraid to hear what if she doesn't feel the same way about me that I feel about her? I don't know if I'd want to allow her to speak her mind. It's like,
She'd say, Mom, it's not me, it's you.
she'd say, you're smothering me. She'd tell me, you need some boundaries. And I'm not ready to hear that.
No.
So elephant.
That's better off.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, this has been so fun. And any final words or what's next, or just staying curious?
Oh my gosh. Stay curious.
Yeah.
Trust yourself.
Yeah.
Find your people. Communication. This is what you've studied. Use it professionally.
Yeah.
And, figure out what's right for you. Trust your gut, though, also.
Yes.
Yeah. Ask questions. Be curious. Know yourself. How much time do you have? I could
Rinse
go
and
on
repeat.
on.
And then start over and do the same
Take
things
a break.
again. Yeah.
Do yoga.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And that wraps up this episode. Thank you for tuning into SLP Full Disclosure. For more information about this episode, check out the show notes on our website at medtravelers.com/SLP Full Disclosure. And don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so you never miss a guest. Are you interested in becoming a travel SLP? Visit medtravelers.com to learn more and explore the exciting opportunities we offer at top-level facilities across the country. Also, a special thanks to Jonathan Carey for producing this episode and Aiden Dykes for the music and editing. And as always, this episode was powered by Med Travelers. See you next time.